This is a presentation of Chapter 8, Section 3 in the 8th grade textbook entitled Circles. Our objective here is to find the circumference and area of circles. So what's happening here is really we're wrapping up our study of the two-dimensional shapes so we can jump over to the three-dimensional shapes. And here, really what's important here is going to be the area. Yes, we'll use the circumference as well at times, but the area here is important. We have to make sure we can find the area because the area of a circle formula is inserted into some of those other formulas, especially that surface area formula when we get to looking at the cone and the cylinder. If we can't find the area of the circle, we're certainly not going to be able to find the surface area of those two shapes. So we'll wrap up our study of 2D shapes here. Let's get to some definitions. That's a circle to begin with. That's the set of all points in a plane that are the same distance from a given point called the center. The set of all points in a plane that are the same distance from a given point called the center. The set of all points in a plane that are the same distance from a given point called the center. Radius, that's a line segment with one endpoint at the center of the circle and the other endpoint on the circle. A line segment with one endpoint at the center of the circle and the other endpoint on the circle. So some of you are sitting there thinking right now, isn't that the line from the middle to the edge? Absolutely, it is the line from the middle to the edge. That definition there is just the formal definition of radius. That's all it is. Diameter. That's a line segment that passes through the center of a circle and has endpoints on the circle. A line segment that passes through the center of a circle and has endpoints on the circle. So if you're sitting there thinking, is that the line that goes all the way across the circle? Not exactly. It does go all the way across the circle, but it also has to go through the center. You can draw a line across the circle but not make it go through the middle. That's just called a chord. Right? But when it goes through the center as well, then it becomes the diameter. Obviously, if the radius goes from the center to the edge and the diameter goes all the way across through the center, then we know that 2 radii, which is the plural of radius, 2 radii would be the equivalent of the diameter, or half a diameter would be the same thing as the radius. Keep that in mind. You'll use that today in the notes and in the homework. All right, and then circumference, that's the distance around a circle. Circumference is the distance around a circle. Remember, it's the same thing as perimeter, but we can't measure it like we could if we were measuring the perimeter of a square or a rectangle. We could pick up a ruler and do that. We can't measure a curved surface with a ruler. So we call it something a little bit different, even though it has the same connotation. All right, not exactly the same in that regard, though. Measurable versus not measurable, but it's the same idea. Circumference is the distance around the circle, the distance around the shape. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the examples here. We're going to go ahead and start off with example 1. In number 1 here, it's asking me to find the circumference of each circle, both in terms of pi and to the nearest tenth, and we're going to use 3.14 for pi. Now, what I've just highlighted there are the formulas that you would need, and what's kind of nice about this one is there's a formula for radius, and there's a formula for diameter. So, whichever one they give us, we can work with no problem. All right, so in the A example there, they're asking me to find the circumference of the circle with a radius of 4 meters. So in that formula, 2 times pi times r, 2 times pi times the radius is what that would mean. I'm going to change r into 4 and then simplify. So I change r to 4, and it's 2 times pi times 4. Now, what is a little bit different, especially if I compare this to last year, is they're asking me for 2 things. They're asking me for an answer in terms of pi, and they're asking me for an answer that's rounded to the nearest tenth there. All right? When they're asking me for the answer in terms of pi, that's actually one less step of work to do. All right, because all I'm going to do is take this answer right here, or this line of work here, and I'm going to combine the 2 and the 4. And since these are all together with multiplication, that means I'm combining them with multiplication. 2 and 4 go together to make 8, and I'm going to leave pi alone. And I'm going to write 8 pi, or 8 times pi. That is the circumference of that circle, 8 pi. That is actually an exact answer. Right? When we change it to 3.14, you know that 3.14 itself is an approximation. So once I change it to pi into 3.14 and then multiply, which is actually what they're showing you right here, this 25.1, right? That's not an exact answer anymore because pi was rounded to begin with, right? And we rounded this to the 10th, so it's even a little bit further off, right? But this 8 pi answer, that's an exact answer. That's exactly the circumference, 8 pi. Done. They're asking you for both answers here, so both of these are what you need to give, and they're doing the same thing in the homework. They're going to ask for the answer in terms of pi and the actual value when we change it to 3.14 and then multiply and then round. Here they're talking about a circle with a diameter of 3.3 feet. Notice here there is another formula, pi times the diameter. Now, what I want to make sure you realize before we go on here is that these are really the same formula. Think about it. All right? It says 2r here, and in this one it just says d. Well, remember we talked about in the introduction that 2 radii, right, together make a diameter, or if I chop a diameter in half, I get a radius. Well, 2 radii would be the same as a diameter. So even though the formulas look a little bit different, they really express the same thing. Okay, so pi times the diameter, 3.3 times pi. Well, that's your answer in terms of pi, really easy, 3.3 pi. And then I'm going to change pi into 3.14 and multiply. So 3.3 times 3.14, and that yields 10.4, as in 10.4 feet. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at number 2. We're switching from circumference to area here. Find the area of the circle, both in terms of pi and to the nearest tenth, using 3.14 once again for pi. Notice here they've given you formulas, but even though one is radius and one diameter it's the same formula. There's only one formula for area, pi r squared. So we're going to make sure when we see diameter, we're going to chop that in half for a radius and use that chopped in half number in the area formula. So let's start with A here. All right, they gave us the radius, so I don't have to worry about that. Plug in the radius for 4r. So this is 3.14 times 4 squared, or 3.14 times 16, which is 50.2, which is this answer here. Remember, I changed pi into 3.14, but if I just write it with pi, that's that answer in terms of pi they're looking for. So 16 times pi, again, I've simplified 4 squared there, 16 times pi is that answer in terms of pi. Over in B, again, they've given us the diameter here, so we're going to have to chop that guy in half before we can work, which is what they're showing you right here. This d divided by 2 step equals 1.65. That's the radius. That's the relationship. Chop the diameter in half, and you get the radius. So, now that I have 1.65, I'm doing 1.65 squared times pi. Great calculator question. 1.65 squared is 2.7225. All right, so this is 2.7225 pi, which would mean 2.7225 times pi. That's your answer in terms of pi. And then I change pi into 3.14, multiply, round as directed, and I end up with 8.5. Notice I did not round here. All right, they asked me to round my answer, not round the number I'm calculating with. All right, we only round when we got here to my final answer, 8.5. Number 3. Graph the circle with the center -2, 1 that passes through 1, 1. Find the area and circumference, both in terms of pi and to the nearest 10. Use 3.14 for pi. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this question. And so it seems like they may not have given us enough information here. But truth be told is they gave us plenty of information. Let's talk about the graphing here. They told us in the first line that the center of the circle is through -2, 1, which is what you see graphed here. Now, if you're looking at that and saying, well, that's in the wrong spot. No, it's not in the wrong spot. Realize that based on the numbers they've got marked here, this is actually going by 2s. So a full jump over would be to 2, and half a jump up would get me to 1. So that is actually correct. All right. Then they say that the circle passes through 1, 1. And that's what you see graphed here. Again, the graph goes by 2s, so it's half a jump, half a jump. That's right. Now, from that, you're saying, well, how did they get the rest of the circle drawn? That doesn't seem like enough information. Actually, it's plenty of information. What we know now is the radius of the circle. The radius of the circle, based on this, is 3. 1.5 jumps here, but realize everything represents 2, so 1.5 times 2 is 3. Since the radius here is 3, that means at any point I look at, the radius has to be 3. So what they're doing here is they're saying, okay, go 3 away from the circle, going any direction you want. And what they decided to do is go 3 north and put a point, and 3 to the west and put a point, and 3 to the south and put a point. Now we could put a point 3 away anywhere we want, but obviously something like this, right, we're going to have to use a formula to figure that out, whereas if I stick to my grid lines, it's a lot simpler. So once we generated those other points, then I connected those points and I get the circle that you see on the screen. Okay, so we've explained the circle, and you're going to have a question really similar to that on the homework tonight. So make sure you use it when you need it. But now that we've got our circle, and we know the radius is 3, that's really all I need to find the circumference and the area. So for the area, pi times the radius squared. So pi times 3 squared. 3 squared is 9, so that's the same as 9 times pi. Well, just like in the earlier questions, they wanted the answer in terms of pi. So that's one answer, 9 times pi. And then they simplified it because they changed pi into 3.14 and multiplied. Again, not an exact answer anymore, but it is all numbers now, which might be easier for some people to understand. 9 times 3.14 rounded to the 10th is 28.3. Remember, area is the number of square units a shape covers, which is why they're saying units squared here. If it was given in inches, we'd say inches squared. If it was in feet, we'd say feet squared, and so on and so forth. Now, for circumference here, they've just given us pi times the diameter. So that's 3.14 times 6. Now you're saying, how did we get that? We didn't find 6. Remember, yes we did. We talked about the relationship between the radius and the diameter earlier. 2 radii, going halfway across the circle twice, is the same as a diameter, which goes all the way across the circle and through the middle. So if the radius is 3, the diameter is 6. Now, if that bothers you, use the other formula, because remember, there was 2 formulas for circumference. They just picked one. Right? You can use 2 pi r here. If I use 2 pi r, that's 2 times pi, 3.14, times the radius 3. Well, when I put the 2 and the 3 together, the 2 and the 3 go together to make 6. 6 times pi, or 6 times 3.14, which is exactly what you see right here. Further proof of the relationship between radius and diameter. All right, so 6 pi, that's my answer with pi in it. And then I'm doing 6 times 3.14, which is 18.8. And notice that's just in regular units, the distance around. Think about it, if we just did the distance around a square, it would be in inches or feet, so not inches squared, not feet squared, just the regular unit. So same thing here, 18.8 units.